I'm going to introduce, first of all, Mike Rogalski. Mike's managing architect at Northern Trust. And I guess I should have paid attention to what you told me earlier. But anyway, figures. So Mike, so Northern's been a customer of MarkLogic now for about 3 years. And Mike was actually the first individual at Northern that I spoke to about MarkLogic. And you know, Mike had some, I would say, healthy skepticism about this NoSQL stuff, right, and everything. And Northern, you know, financial institutions tend to be on the conservative side, you know, just in general, right? Management, how they handle your money, and with technology, at least in terms of how they move with it. And I'd say Northern's on the conservative side of, you know, the financial institutions as well. So there was a you know, a good, again, healthy but somewhat lengthy education process that Mike really guided us through, you know, pretty much the whole way, and the bank. And we finally found a, you know, the right application to go after. Things move forward, you know, nicely from that point. And actually, I could go ahead and introduce Maureen Pinsnick as well. Maureen is a senior solutions architect, and at the time, originally, was part of the enterprise architecture group that Lynn Hardy headed up, and you heard from Lynn earlier today. Mike was in that organization, and Maureen was in that organization as well. So she went through a lot of that education process, but at the time, we were looking for really the right application to move forward on. She was part of the asset servicing group, and that's really where that first trade transaction hub moved forward, and that's how we closed that business as well. So you'll be hearing from two key individuals that have been involved with MarkLogic throughout the whole process at Northern Trust. With that, Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thanks. Thanks very much, John. Can you hear me in the back? Great. Thanks for taking the time with us this afternoon. Mike Rogalski with Northern Trust. We want to talk to you about how we introduced MarkLogic into Northern Trust and some of the challenges that we faced and maybe you're facing, and some of the techniques we used. Call it crossing the chasm in a northern direction. John just introduced us. You can see our thumbnail bios, myself and Maureen's, in the speaker section of the MarkLogic World app. Goals for our talk: I want to identify some challenges that all of us face in introducing new technologies into complex organizations, suggest some tactics and approaches that have worked for us, maybe worked for you as well, and stimulate some thinking around how we make good on the innovations that are carrying our companies forward. This is our agenda. And some fun facts about Northern Trust. We're a financial services firm, global, headquartered in Chicago with offices in Europe, Middle East, Asia. As Lynn Hardy at the keynote mentioned this morning, we have over $11 trillion under custody and $1 trillion under management. So to kick it off, and I'll apologize ahead of time, the time is too short to really do justice to this topic. And much of what I'm going to say is probably common sense and things that perhaps you already know, but sometimes common sense needs to be repeated, and perhaps we can learn from that. And I'll also say that I'm very interested, and Maureen is as well, in engaging a conversation with you either after this presentation at the conference or in the weeks to come. So feel free to reach out to us. Some of you who are, all of you who are here who were here at the MarkLogic World last year may have heard Geoffrey Moore's keynote address. Geoffrey Moore wrote a classic book called Crossing the Chasm. He built on work by a man named Everett Rogers, who in the early 60s wrote a book called Diffusion of Innovations. And it was Rogers who created the bell-shaped curve that Moore used, and some of the language that Moore used that we're familiar with, in depicting the spread or the trajectory of the spread of a new technology or an innovation. Rogers was focused on agricultural innovation, and Moore was talking to providers of technology, the MarkLogics of the world, Microsoft, IBM. And Moore identified what he called the chasm, challenges specific to technology providers that they had to overcome in order to promote their products and new technologies. And he provided, Moore did, some suggestions for how technology providers could do that. Well, users of technologies, which are probably most of the companies in this room, also face a kind of chasm, our own challenges, and those are the things that we want to talk to you about this morning. Probably some of these questions are familiar to most of us in the room, and they pertain to any new technology that Maureen and I and others at our company have tried to introduce, including MarkLogic. So things like, well, why are we looking at this particular technology now? What's the practical use for it? What does it do? What doesn't it do? Who really wants it? Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to support it? We already have technologies in place that can do these kinds of things. Why don't we use those? If we introduce this new technology, what are we going to get rid of? We already have too much, and so forth and so on. And these are the challenges that we faced in introducing MarkLogic to the company and other technologies, I should say. And if I kind of stand back and summarize some of these things, just as I'm kind of mixing my metaphors here, chasm and electricity, but just as electricity powers our circuits and appliances and tooling, so does perhaps innovation help power the forward momentum of our companies. And just as a circuit will present resistance or impedance to current, there are impedances in all our organizations to the introduction of innovation. Those impedances include healthy skepticism, and it is healthy. In-place investments, incumbent investments that we are using, finite resources. There's only so much time, money, and staff. And organizational inertia. All our companies are human organizations, and as Donnie was saying just a little bit ago, change is tough. Some of the approaches that we've used, and that I'll quickly outline, include the following. Set the research agenda deliberately. Engage key stakeholders. Distill the facts of your market surveillance. Build the case for and against the new technology or for and against the options that you have. And champion the adoption. Let me just say, too, I was really pleased. Donnie and I had a chance to talk with the previous speaker. And I was pleased to see that he included, I think he expressed it as know what to focus on, which sort of resonated with me in terms of setting the agenda and engaging key stakeholders. All the while making it all clear and explicit, and that's some of what I want to emphasize. This piece of collateral that you're seeing here, and I'm sorry, it's kind of an eye chart, but it's something that we use at Northern Trust. It's called our technology radar. We update this every year and sometimes more frequently. We divide the world into 4 quadrants: application-related technologies, security-related technologies, infrastructure, and data and information technologies. And then the concentric circles that you see represents sort of 6-month bands of time. And we ask our lead architects and others, what trends are they seeing? What technologies do they think we ought to be researching in the months ahead? And we very deliberately plot these things. And just a couple of weeks ago, Len Hardy, our director, who you met in the keynote this morning, sent out another communication. Okay, time to refurbish, update the technology radar. The point I'm making here is this is a tool that we use to make it very deliberate and explicit what we're going to focus on. Northern Trust has a subsidiary called 50 South Capital, which invests in startup firms. And as a result, our leadership visits Silicon Valley semi-annually every 6 months. Len, our CTO, and others come back, and they tell us what they have seen kind of coming over the horizon. Now, not every company in this room has an investment arm, but I guess I'd encourage us all to think about what it is that we could do that may be comparable to visiting Silicon Valley. And in this context, I'll suggest that you read so just a terrific book by a woman named Amy Webb. She's a professor down at New York University. The book is called The Signals Are Talking, and she presents a really fine methodology for kind of detecting what's coming over the horizon. Engaging stakeholders, as Donnie said, that's key. It's common sense, but again, you got to make sure you do it. It's something that we take time to do. In the case of MarkLogic, NoSQL technologies, those stakeholders included our lead architects, selected business partners, the database engineering group, procurement, and our leadership. And we sort of depicted the stakeholders here kind of multicolored to suggest the fact that every one of these groups has a slightly different perspective about what they're seeking from a new technology or an innovation and what challenges there may be. Some fun facts on the right side, I just looked at calendar and I asked myself, well, what meetings did we hold regarding NoSQL? And not necessarily about MarkLogic specifically, but you can sort of see we began our journey late in 2014. Did some what I call softening the beach as we were educating ourselves about what NoSQL could do, who the players were in the market, and we brought our lead architects and selected business partners together to educate ourselves about what this technology was and where did we think it could be used. And you can sort of see in 2016, we began to cross the chasm as we began to find use cases that, gosh, this looks like a really good potential for the use of NoSQL. Another tool that we've used and a piece of collateral that maybe you might find useful is when we've introduced new technologies in the past, and this was true in the case of NoSQL as well, we divide the world into three key aspects: the functional aspect, what a technology or innovation is going to do for the business; the technical aspect, how it's put together technically; and very importantly, the commercial aspect. How does this supplier go to market? Do they partner well? Are they viable? Those kinds of considerations. And for each one of those aspects, functional, technical, and commercial, we ask ourselves four key questions. Does this thing work? Does it fit? Can we count on it? And what are the costs? And we ask those with respect to each of those key aspects. And by using this framework, this approach, we're able to kind of unpack the discrete criteria that our stakeholders are telling us they would seek in a technology. Kind of keying in on, just by way of example, the dimension of capability across these three key aspects. You see here a subset of some of the criteria that our stakeholders put together, and I know this is an eye chart. You're not going to be able to read, some of this in the back. I hope you can see the different colors because the different colors represent each of the stakeholder groups that we engaged and what they thought was important from the functional, technical, and commercial aspect with respect to, does this thing work? And for each one of the other dimensions, we kind of do the same sort of thing. And this framework enables us to kind of stand back, gauge the ups and downs of a technology or of an innovation, and contrast and compare competitive products. The final tactic or approach that we've taken, and I would encourage, is again to build the case for and against a particular innovation or set of products. And again, this is illustrative, but you can sort of get the spirit of what we're trying to do. For each of those aspects, functional, technical, commercial, we stand back and say, well, how does this particular option weigh? And then we build the case. Be a prosecutor and an advocate. And then at the end of the day, these are all, I guess, in a sense, political decisions, politics in the good sense of the word. And you have to make a recommendation and make the decision. So my goal here was simply to share with you, hopefully this resonates. It's probably common sense, as I say, and I'm not doing justice. But here are some impedances that we've encountered, some approaches that we've taken, setting the research agenda, engaging stakeholders, as Donnie said, distill the facts, build the case, and then, very importantly, someone to champion the adoption if you choose to go forward. And my colleague Maureen now is going to talk about that work.
Thanks, Mike. As Mike said, that one of the ways that to adopt a new technology, even in the midst of healthy skepticism, is the role a technology champion can play in crossing the chasm, in this case from a technology user point of view. And what we find is that the technology champions will emerge from the innovators and the early adopters naturally. And they will introduce the new technologies for consideration and identify opportunities for initial use cases. The technology champion can make connections to learning resources, as well as to organize informal groups to further influence and strengthen the awareness of the new technology. And also, a technology champion can become a sort of proof of concept ambassador, and this helps other early adopters be able to easily kickstart the new technology and gain buy-in. So these are some of the things that we at Northern Trust as technology champions found were effective in taking MarkLogic from that innovators phase to the early adopters and hopefully beyond. So it was late in 2016 that Northern Trust brought in MarkLogic, and now we have several projects across the firm, all ranging in different stages of development, from production to also more POCs. And you'll see that a lot of these projects have the word hub in them, and that's no coincidence, right? It reflects the common use case, which we've all heard about, a data hub. And this has been very effective. It's a form of data integration. It's very common. And it's also been one that has allowed us to get quickly started on POCs. And also the concepts around data hub help us to understand the strengths and features in MarkLogic, quite simply. So we're looking to actually expand the use of the data hub across other application teams as it becomes more mature as a product for MarkLogic. So in addition to the data hub, we find another recurring theme of using MarkLogic at Northern Trust, and that is of logging. We have found in many meetings Mike and I have had with various teams who are interested in finding out more about MarkLogic that they need to store logs, all kinds of logs, event logs, system logs, application request logs, transaction logs, all kinds of logs. And we found that MarkLogic has been a good solution for this because of its ability to store the semi-structured variable nature of logs and then to more easily search them than had been previously possible with other technologies. So another way to facilitate adoption of a new technology is to establish a center of excellence. And there was another presentation this morning from AbbVie. They talked about their standing up a center of excellence as well for their data integration best practices. And what we found is that MarkLogic Professional Services helped us to understand what this might look like and how we could use a shared function to promote among project teams best practices, proven architecture patterns, appropriate skill sets, and just basically centralized coordination of processes and standards. However, we know that integrating a new technology with processes and people can take time. So we have also used other forms of spreading adoption to serve similar goals. So as I said, we kind of taken things slow and we're starting small. And with our architecture group really providing the initial leadership, because we were bringing it in for consideration. However, we found that the early adopters started to want to kind of group together somehow, informally even, to just discuss their findings, their knowledge, and quite honestly, their questions on how to use MarkLogic. So we formed a, like I said, less formalized group called a MarkLogic Community of Practice. And another thing that was very helpful was setting aside time called office hours with our MarkLogic solution architect. And that would help to basically bring together teams for whatever topic or questions they might have. And it helped to really promote knowledge transfer and further understand and get buy-in to the adoption of MarkLogic. And now as we begin to go a little bit further, we are considering possibly standing up a center of excellence, but with much less involvement from the architecture group. So in the interest of time and lunch on the next agenda item, I'm going to kind of skip over this. This is kind of more of like what you can review later, perhaps, in terms of some COE functions, best practices, and so forth. But one thing I want to make a point about is that what we would envision is The COE would provide consultating services around such things as the metadata, standards, envelope pattern, that kind of thing, integration with BI tools like Power BI, for instance, and then the architecture blueprints, expertise around an emerging set of data integration guides. So we heard also in the presentation earlier today about the MarkLogic blueprints, now known as data integration guides. And they have started, really one of the core guides is around the data hub. And as you see here, the data hub is really well aligned to familiar business concepts of ingesting data in its raw format, transforming it, harmonizing it into its logical form, using the data hub, and then providing and creating data services in the business views of the data. Not last, but first, right? Data services first. And all while we have different physical representations of the data throughout this process, XML, CSV, JSON, RDF triples, and SQL for querying the data relationally. So another one of the recurring themes with MarkLogic has been the need to store complex relationships across a range of topics. And this is one of the areas that I see we may be able to use MarkLogic in terms of viewing things from a multiple array of perspectives. So for example, the 360-degree view of IT's business and counterparty risk among these various entities, like in IT's business applications, infrastructure, business functions, projects, budgets, and all the operational aspects that go along with that in running an IT shop. Likewise, with counterparty risk, it's a very familiar concept, however, from many different perspectives, from compliance and risk to operations or metadata management and operations. So we're looking to use the RDF triples and document store, which is described in this slide here, as a multi-model database. And I think many of you are familiar with this. And the documents allow you to store the entities. The triples allow you to store the relationships and facts about those entities. And then finally, you are able to put a relational view on top of that for querying with SQL tools. And FIBO is one of the industry ontologies that I think can really be leveraged by the use of document store and RDF triples. Enterprise Data Management Council creates the financial industry business ontology. And this is really about the language of the business and using semantics. And semantics can really come alive with these documents and the triple store. And what I'm hoping that we can do, perhaps as a future exploratory use case, is to use a triple store and documents to map these ontologies. And this is one of my actual real use cases, and was something that we've evolved over time at Northern Trust, our information architecture. And when I learned more about FIBO, I realized, wow, this is just like our information architecture that we've been working on for years. It's continued to evolve over this, but we could perhaps use the FIBO ontology, the RDF triples there, with the RDF triple store and MarkLogic to bring this alive. And perhaps there could be, well, it is difficult, not saying it's trivial, the devil's in the details and the data mapping, but perhaps there's a diamond in the rough there. So in summary, crossing the chasm is hard, as Geoffrey Moore coined the phrase, but we would like to leave these suggestions with you. Seek out innovators and early adopters, provide guidelines, frameworks, and patterns, make proof of concepts easy to initiate, organize informal groups to socialize ideas, use innovation to solve the hard problems, and choose a technology provider who will partner with you to cross the chasm. Thank you. Sorry if I went a little over.